by the way, the University of the West Indies have a license for grow ganja as one of the research center. A long time ganja grew up on the campus, you know, from the estate time. Both the African them where they have in a captivity and the Indians who they bought here and paid them money to work. They brought the Indians on the campus here in the 1800s and they was paid to work on the Mona estate and the Hope estate and growing them ganja and smoke it. But now the university get it legalized authority for grow ganja. University and UTech. But it will slow down running, so it have nothing to do with the running and athletics program. It's medicinal herb. I think little more the hospital them have to have a stock of ganja, you know, in case this or that patient need a one draw or a couple draws. More you have to go, just like how you have to carry food go to hospital, little more you have to carry ganja.
All right. The fact sheet sets out the main changes that have been made to the Dangerous Drugs Act and recent amendments to the DDA, which is the Dangerous Drugs Act, made by the Dangerous Drugs Amendment Act 2015, will introduce several important changes to the way the DDA will operate in relation to ganja. The Dangerous Drugs Act, as you know, it's now in effect. It came into effect on Wednesday at midnight. It's 12:12. And the new provisions are now in place regarding the possession and smoking of ganja, the use of ganja by persons of the Rastafarian faith, and the use of ganja for medical, therapeutic, and scientific purposes. As at the date, all right, let me just go down to what it says about possession of ganja. All right, possession of 2 ounces or less of ganja is no longer an offense for which one can be arrested, charged, and have to go to court, and it will not result in a criminal record. However, the police may issue a ticket to a person in possession of 2 ounces or less of ganja. Similar to a traffic ticket, and the person has 30 days to pay the sum of $500 at any tax office. A person who is found in possession of 2 ounces or less and who is under the age of 18 years, or who is 18 years or older and appears to the police to be dependent on ganja, will also be referred to the National Council on Drug Abuse for counseling, in addition to having to pay the ticket. It remains a criminal offense to be in possession of over 2 ounces of ganja, and offenders can be arrested, charged, tried in court, and if found guilty, sentenced to a fine or to imprisonment or both. The conviction will also be recorded on that person's criminal record. The rules against ganja possession or against possession of ganja summarized just now do not apply to possession of ganja for religious purposes as a sacrament in adherence to the Rastafarian faith, possession of ganja for medical or therapeutic purposes as recommended or prescribed by a registered medical doctor or other health practitioner or class practitioners approved by the Minister of Health. Possession of ganja for purposes of scientific research that is conducted by an accredited tertiary institution or is approved by the Scientific Research Council. And also possession of ganja pursuant to a license, authorization, or permit issued under the DDA. Now to smoking of ganja. Smoking of ganja in a public place or within 5 meters of a public place is prohibited in a manner similar to cigarettes. A person who smokes in public cannot be arrested or detained. However, the police may issue a ticket to that person who will have 30 days to pay $500 at any tax office. For the purposes of these smoking rules, a public place includes a workplace and any place which is for the use of or accessible to the public, such as sidewalks, bus stops, restaurants, offices, educational institutions, pharmacies, hospitals, areas used by children, supermarkets, and parks. Smoking of ganja at privately occupied residences that are not used for commercial purposes is not an offense, but is governed by the rules on possession of ganja referred to before. Furthermore, smoking of ganja will be legally permitted in places that are licensed for the smoking of ganja for medical or therapeutic purposes. Adherents of the Rastafarian faith will also be permitted to smoke ganja for sacramental purposes in locations registered as places of Rastafarian worship. Registered. What about the failure to pay a ticket? According to the fact sheet, it is an offense to fail to pay a ticket that has been issued for smoking ganja in public or for possession of 2 ounces or less of ganja. The offender will be required to attend the petty sessions court and may be ordered to do community service, or in the rare case where community service cannot be arranged, pay a fine of $2,000. A conviction for failing to pay a ticket will also be recorded to the offender's criminal record. Now, once again, send your questions in. I know you have questions for Senator Goldyn. We want to ask those questions on your behalf this morning. You can call in through the switchboard, give your questions to Shamara or Tracy. Or you can send them directly to me by way of Twitter, Facebook, or email. All right, now to importation of ganja for terminal or serious chronic illnesses. A person who is suffering from cancer or any other terminal or serious chronic illness may import medicine or a therapeutic product derived from or containing ganja. In order to do so, a registered medical practitioner must certify that the person is suffering from the illness and must recommend the person's use of the medicine or therapeutic product. The importation of the medicine or therapeutic product must comply with regulations which are to be made. And there is more. Importation for scientific research. In furtherance of scientific research, an accredited tertiary institution or other body approved by the Scientific Research Council may apply for authorization to import ganja, including any part of a plant, from any jurisdiction where the export of it to Jamaica is lawful. The importation of ganja for research purposes must comply with regulations which are to be made. An authorization to import ganja for research purposes also protects any third party who is engaged by the scientific institution or body for this purpose. And then the fact sheet also addresses the cultivation of ganja by householders. Each household is allowed to legally grow no more than 5 ganja plants on their premises. If there is more than one household on any premises, each household may grow 5 ganja plants. And the cultivation of ganja for scientific research, an accredited tertiary institution or other body approved by the Scientific Research Council may apply for authorization to cultivate ganja in furtherance of scientific research on lands approved for that cultivation. An authorization to cultivate ganja for research purposes also protects any third party who is engaged by a scientific institution or body for this purpose. And ganja which is cultivated, processed, used, and otherwise handled in accordance with this type of authorization is not subjected to the rules against ganja under the DDA. Cultivation for Rastafarian sacramental purposes. The fact sheet says persons 18 years or older who are adherents to the Rastafarian faith or Rastafarian organizations may apply for authorization to cultivate ganja for religious purposes as a sacrament in adherence to the Rastafarian faith. Ganja is cultivated under such authorization. So ganja that is cultivated under such authorization may not be smoked in public places, other than at locations registered as places of Rastafarian worship, or sold or otherwise dealt with commercially, or exported from Jamaica, but is otherwise not subject to the rules against ganja under the DDA. Events to celebrate or observe the Rastafarian faith. Persons who are adherents of the Rastafarian faith or Rastafarian organizations may apply for an event promoted or sponsored by them to be declared an exempt event. In order to apply, the event must be primarily for the purpose of a celebration or observance of the Rastafarian faith. Where an event is declared exempt, persons who attend the event will not be liable to be arrested, detained, or prosecuted for smoking ganja or possession of ganja at the event or transporting ganja to the event, as long as they have complied with the amounts and conditions specified in the order declaring it an exempt event. Visitors to Jamaica who are users of medical marijuana. Persons who do not ordinarily reside in Jamaica, for example, tourists or visiting Jamaicans who live overseas, may apply for a permit to allow them to lawfully purchase and possess up to 2 ounces of ganja at a time for medical or therapeutic purposes. To obtain this permit, visitors will need to produce evidence that their use of ganja has been recommended or prescribed by a licensed medical practitioner in the country where they live. Alternatively, they can sign a voluntary declaration to confirm this. The permit is issued by Jamaica's Ministry of Health and a fee is payable. And then to the Cannabis Licensing Authority. A Cannabis Licensing Authority is created by the DDA for the purpose of enabling a lawful regulated industry in ganja for medical, therapeutic or scientific purposes, and in hemp to be established in Jamaica. The Cannabis Licensing Authority will be responsible for issuing licenses, permits and authorization for the handling of hemp and ganja, and for monitoring and otherwise regulating persons who have been issued licenses, permits and authorizations. It is specifically mandated to ensure that regulations do not contravene Jamaica's international obligations. The Cannabis Licensing Authority is comprised of representatives from several ministries which are engaged with issues relating to ganja: the Attorney General's Department, the National Council on Drug Abuse, a representative from academia, and representatives from civil society groups and other non-governmental community-based and faith-based organizations. And then it goes on to the use of revenue from ganja. The DDA provides the Minister of Finance that the Minister of Finance shall direct that a percentage of the revenues earned from issuing licenses, permits and authorizations relating to ganja and hemp be used for strengthening the capacity and programs of the National Council on Drug Abuse, including public education programs to discourage the use of ganja by persons under 18 years, persons with a mental disorder, pregnant women and other vulnerable groups, strengthening Jamaica's mental health institutions and services, funding scientific and medical research into ganja and hemp, and supporting the regulatory arrangements of a Cannabis Licensing Authority. It also talks about increased penalties. The fines of the DDA have also been significantly increased for export, cultivation, possession, selling, and trafficking of illegal drugs. And there is also a table that sets out who may apply, where to apply, and the purposes for which licenses, permits, and other authorizations may be granted under the DDA. Roger, I know you wanted the minister, as I said before, 2 weeks ago, and you had some burning questions. At that time, you know, it wasn't the ganja law.
Yes.
And I'm saying the ganja law, as we affectionately call it, hadn't yet come into into effect. But here we go. The minister is on the line. Minister Goldyn, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
All right. Let me just tell you up front that we've been asking our listeners to send their questions in all morning, and we have quite a few. But we'll see how many of them we can get through. All right. First of all, how is it going? 3 days or 4 days in since the new ganja law, the amendments to the Dangerous Drugs Act? What are your impressions so far?
Well, there's a lot of interest in it for sure. You know, the media are interested. People are interested. They want as much clarity as they can get. I think it's good.
All right. Lots of questions also. I've been going through the fact sheet, and something that jumped out at me immediately from the fact sheet under possession of ganja number 2 speaks to the police, if a person who is found with ganja 2 ounces or less, whether the police determine that this person is addicted to ganja, that the police will refer the person for counseling to the National Council on Drug Abuse. My first question on that is, how can the police determine what benchmark, what measurement would the police be using to determine whether or not someone is addicted to ganja?
They can't make any kind of scientific determination. There is some training that will be going on between the police and the National Council on Drug Abuse to facilitate referrals where a person can, just by interacting with them, it may be possible to see that this person has a problem. And the referral is exactly what it is. It's a referral to the National Council for some form of program or counseling or assessment. So it's not something which is like a court order saying that they have to do this or else they'll suffer some prejudice or penalty. But it's to facilitate a referral to a rehab program for persons who may have a need for that service.
Mm-hmm. What are your own thinking on that? I know it's there. I mean, obviously you must have thought it through. I have a lot of issues with it. I think that there's somehow I cannot see this, that the police doing this. I know, like, you have guidance counselors in schools who can do certain things, but I don't know. Do you have that kind of situation with the police where they are capable of making these?
Well, I think that there are situations in which the police have to adopt more, I would say, sort of socially aware role when dealing with citizens. Domestic disputes is one example, where the police sometimes do have to use their discretion in dealing with a situation rather than the strict criminal law, for example, and try and identify where potential danger may lie for violence in the future and so on, and be aware of what agencies of the state exist that could provide some kind of help in the situation at hand. So this is really the concept that provision is trying to embody, that, you know, that the police with appropriate training may be able to see a situation where there's somebody who has a need for counseling or assistance, and armed with information as to what is available, they can make that referral.
Is there flexibility written into the entire process in terms of, once this is operationalized, which I know that it is now, then you will not know how the thing is going to work? I know you're using best practices from around the world also, but obviously our situation is unique from many, many different perspectives. So what kind of flexibility do we have written into the process so that once we start operationalize this, we can look at this, tweak it? Do we have that?
With the specific process that we've been discussing?
Yes, not just this specific one, but the amendments. Once you put those into operation,
they are in operation now. Yes.
Right. Are you expecting that you'll have challenges that you'll have to? So you have to return to the drawing board to tweak certain things. That these are not all set in stone.
With any law that is attempting to do something new and innovative, one must always expect that there will be challenges, and one must always be prepared to review and adjust. You know, nothing is the future. The nature of the future is that one can't really foresee it with accuracy. So one makes one's best assessment, and one is guided by what you consider just and right, and you do what you have to do. Now, many laws are amended many times, and it's quite possible that this one will be. And in fact, I really regard this regime as an interim regime, because I believe that there's going to be some evolution internationally of the treatment of ganja. That may take some years, but when the international treatment of the plant changes, there may be opportunities to do further things that would be helpful in our scenario. We are to some extent constrained by the international obligations that Jamaica has assumed as a signatory to 3 international drug control conventions. So that was a long answer. The short answer to your question is, I do anticipate that there may be issues that arise that may require adjustment to processes or to the legislation itself. And that's not new or novel. That is true of most pieces of legislation that pass through Parliament.
All right, Senator Goldyn, I'm going to get to the questions. I really want to have a longer conversation with you, and I hope that we'll be able to do that. But I can't be selfish with this morning, because I know there are so many questions out there. So let me go to the questions that have been sent in by the listeners. All right, so on Twitter, what amount of ganja are you allowed to have at home, since 5 plants can generate way over 2 ounces?
The product of the 5 plants, whatever that may be, you're allowed to have at home. There's no specific weight limit on that.
Okay. All right.
The only thing I would add is that is not for commercial use. In other words, the product of the 5 plants is not to make you into a ganja dealer selling from your home or elsewhere. It is for consumption, primarily for medicinal consumption. That was the intent of that provision, given that in Jamaica, ganja has been used as a folk remedy for generations, not consumed by way of smoking in this instance, but used to produce a liniment or other brews that are of perceived medicinal value in all sorts of aches and pains and coughs and colds and so on. So this was really to provide an avenue whereby persons could produce their own ganja without having to go and buy it on the street.
All right. So that if the police at liberty to, let us say the police has a warrant or has some suspicion and turns up at somebody's at home, what are the rules governing that now? Because if you find from your 5 plants you'd have had so many pounds of ganja in your home, what should the police do or not do?
Well, if the police have probable cause, reasonable suspicion that you are engaging in the dealing in ganja at your home, they can get a warrant from a judicial source, the court or justice of the peace, to search your home in furtherance of an investigation of that offence. So they do have the power to do that. And that is a power that exists in relation to any offence that they may consider that you're engaged in. Now the question would arise, how, if you have the product of your own labor, so to speak, through having had 5 plants at home, how would they prove or disprove the issue as to whether or not this was the product of that planting, and that planting is lawful, and so on. And that would be really a matter of evidence. I mean, what I would hope is that the police will, given the general trend that legislation is pursuing, which is to respect human rights and to decriminalize small quantities and really treat personal use as something very different to the commercialization of ganja for recreational purposes, that the police would not be seeking to expend time and resources pursuing persons at home who are unless there's some good reason to suspect that they are breaking the law.
Roger Hasfall is in studio with me. I know he wants to follow up on the question, but there's a lot of hoping in terms of what the police will do and won't do. It seems to me as if there's going to have to be a change in a paradigm shift, I think, a change in thinking of majority of the police to deal with this from the perspective that you're saying that you're hoping that you'd want them to deal with it.
I agree. I think that there is going to need to be a paradigm shift in the way in which the police regard ganja usage, ganja possession, and so on, because there's been decades of a particular approach to it, which is now changing. And I don't think we're going to achieve a desired outcome overnight. I think it's going to be a process. It's going to require training, and it will take some time.
Is it more difficult, Senator, and I know the processes, and I know that why we could not have legalized, and I have that, the international trade treaties and so on. But is it more difficult decriminalizing, because you're talking about 2 ounces as opposed to legalizing?
It's more difficult.
Yes.
Definitely. I mean, if one just simply said, well, there was no law related to ganja whatsoever, it was just like, bulla or pear, then yeah, that would be very clear and straightforward, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm. All right, Roger, go ahead.
Minister, good morning.
Morning.
We'd like to really say thanks for, taking a step forward in this marijuana issue in Jamaica, late though it be. I have 2 concerns, though. First, you just spoke about the police force need to get adequate training and way how to deal with people's human rights and so on. And we still know how some of them, we know out here in the public how some of them operate. And the clause that we are having 2 ounces or less can still give one a ticket. And failure to pay will require you to go to court to pay a bigger fine, community service, and so on. My question is why the legislation did not go full way and say 2 ounces or less and you're free.
Mm-hmm.
No ticket.
The reason is that the legal advice that we received from the lawyers to the government is that the treaties allow flexibility in terms of the penal regime applicable to possession of ganja, but would not allow us to legalize it completely, even in small quantities. So that's the short answer.
Because that would be legalizing it, even in small quantities.
Yes, if there was no penalty whatsoever attached to it. Yeah.
So basically, a man with a spliff is not totally out of the woods then?
Not out of the woods at all. We mean totally.
It's not out of the woods at all.
Well, don't underestimate. I mean, that last remark has a certain undercurrent to it, which I just want to make.
Yes, and I'm gonna follow up on that.
Don't underestimate the importance of the change that has taken place in relation to small. Most consumers of ganja in Jamaica will have at any given time significantly less than 2 ounces in their possession.
Yes.
And the fact that they are not subject to arrest, they cannot be detained, they cannot be prosecuted in court, and they cannot get a criminal record is a significant change.
But at some point,
don't underestimate the importance of that change.
Right, and nobody's underestimating it. But even though you said at the end of the day there are nothing on your criminal record.
It can lead to it.
Yeah, that's the point I'm getting to. It can lead to a criminal record in terms of paying the fine or not paying the fine.
Yes, if you choose to ignore a ticket that you've received and you don't go to the tax office in 30 days and pay the $500 fine, then yes, you're exposed to further liability for not having done that.
But Minister, this can also be perceived in a new way of oppression in terms of, yes, a man with a small quantity, he's subject to all of this, and it's not a thing of, you said the police may or can offer you a ticket, and we get the feeling that knowing how the security forces operate, this will be a new cash crunch kind of thing. A new...
Well, the amount of the tickets is fairly modest, right? So the capacity to use it as some form of abuse I think is significantly less than, say, if the ticket was $5,000.
Yeah, but maybe one day it will reach that, based on how we know things
okay, we have to move on because the minister can't stay long and there are hundreds of questions coming in on the text line, etc. All right, I'll come back to you for the next question, Roger. All right, on Twitter, Michael Grizzles asks, what are the legal jurisdictions regarding maroons, that is, on possessing, exporting outside the indigenous and land boundary? That's Michael Grizzle on Twitter. Minister,
that's a difficult question for me to attempt to answer on radio. The status of the Maroons' rights under the treaties that were signed in the 1730s with the Crown is unclear under Jamaican law. And I wouldn't want to attempt to provide any answer to that here because I'm really not qualified to give an answer. Suffice to say that the current law doesn't give any particular recognition to the Maroon rights under the treaty, though it is my expectation that the Maroons, if they wish to take advantage of this, will seek licensing and be able to grow and produce ganja for medicinal purposes, as has been part of their culture for centuries.
All right. At Princess K Radio on Twitter says, why was the fine increased from 100 to 500, was it?
The fine was increased for non-payment of the ticket. There's two different things. The amount set for the ticket is $500. The amount that was in the law in relation to if you were caught with possession and you were charged in court, there was a possibility of the fine was set at $100 per ounce. And the reason why it was changed was because that figure was set many, many years ago and was really, like all monetary values that are set a long time ago in the context of inflation over the years and so on. It had a very different real meaning to it than it did then. And so if we didn't adjust it for inflation, because it would have been a bigger figure than $500 had we done that. But we decided that it was $500 was an appropriate figure for non-payment of the ticket. Because in a sense, it's a certain kind of impunity and arrogance in refusing to pay a ticket that you've been given by law. So what you're essentially saying is that you're not going to recognize the obligation that arises from having been issued a lawful ticket.
All right.
It's a different thing to, I think, the fine in court for having been charged, prosecuted, and the hassle and consequences of having had a criminal charge, brought to, probably arrested, may have been detained and locked up, having to go to court and face the court and plead guilty or not, and if you plead not guilty, go through a trial. If you're unsuccessful, have a conviction and a criminal record. The fine was really the least of it.
All right. At C_Amy_Go on Twitter says, can you get a ticket for smoking in public and possession at the same time?
Yes. They're two separate offenses.
What, that means you get two tickets?
You could get two tickets because smoking in public is a separate offense to possession. Okay.
And on the text line, are they supposed to have mobile phone in prisons? Anyway, from the prisons. Are Rastafarians in prisons allowed to smoke the herb?
That's a subject to the prison rules, I suspect, would not allow that.
Are they allowed to smoke cigarette?
I can't answer. I think so, though. I don't think there's a prohibition on smoking in prisons per se, but whether they can smoke in a cell is another matter. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to it because the law in relation to smoking cigarettes, as you know, changed in last year or the year before, I think it was, so that there are certain rules about where you can and can't smoke. And the general thrust of those rules is to say you're not supposed to smoke around other people, other members of the public who may not want to be ingesting your passively or secondarily ingesting your smoke that you emit. And the rules around smoking ganja are similar to the rules related to smoking cigarettes, to where you can and can't smoke. I'm not sure exactly how those rules play out in the prisons.
All right.
Maybe you could speak to the correctional services on that issue.
We'll follow up on that. Irie Daughter, I think your question has been answered. Why pay a fine? I think that we've answered that. And also on the text line, what if an individual has the legal quantity at home? Okay, that was answer too. All right. You want to reiterate?
There's no smoking at home is not an offence. Smoking is only an offence in relation to smoking in the public places where the law doesn't allow it. So that would be in enclosed public spaces typically, or in I believe if you look in the list in the schedule to the Act, you will see certain other open air public spaces where it's not allowed. But it's not all public space. It's not all spaces outside the home where it's not permissible. But it's places where the public gather, really, where like bus stops, stadiums, stadia, I think is the correct word, and other such places.
All right. At Kevoy Stevens on Twitter, boy, the Facebook people are really suffering this morning. What is defined as a therapeutic purposes?
Therapeutic purposes would be for things that enhance the wellness of an individual. Is the best I can attempt to answer that. So it would be therapeutic purposes would be things that address stress, things that address psychological conditions, other psychological conditions, or physical ailments, without necessarily addressing a specific medical condition.
Okay, so, all right, there's a lot more to say on that, of course, Minister. All right, at Ken Supreme on Twitter says, please ask Mr. Goldyn, can I now smoke a spliff in front of a police and not be harassed? And how far is Jamaica from legalizing the weed?
Well, I don't think that really requires a response because it's been given already. If it's in a public place, it's not allowed. And I would urge people to not seek to, especially in this transitional phase, seek to enter into conduct which they know is likely to possibly create some kind of conflict or aggravation.
All right, Michelle says also on Twitter, what will happen if a police see me smoking a spliff driving in my car?
That is a separate offence under the Road Traffic Act. That will be a separate offence. So driving while smoking a spliff will be a separate offence.
In your car?
Driving any vehicle, whether it be a car.
No, it's a private car. You're not supposed to smoke cigarettes in your car? I'm not talking ganja now.
I thought you were referring to ganja. I'm
talking about ganja, but I'm just trying to understand. I didn't know you don't drive and smoke? Okay, I didn't know that one.
No.
All right.
There's a difference with cigarettes and ganja. From the point of view of driving a car are different, really, because cigarettes is not a minor altering substance.
Okay.
In the way that ganja is.
Okay.
Yeah. So driving and drinking rum is not lawful. And any kind of minor altering substance should not be consumed while one is driving.
Okay.
And that's a strange thing to understand.
No, it's totally understood. And then another one from the prison says, will persons charged with having the legal quantity and no, it's not from the prison. Will persons charged with having the legal quantity and are serving time be set free? Oh, okay.
Persons who are currently incarcerated for having had less than the amount.
I think that's what this person is referring to. Yes.
Yeah. No, I think that they will have to complete their sentence. But I don't believe there are many people who are in prison for possession of small quantities of ganja, because typically it was subject to a fine, sometimes community service.
Minister, one more question from me. The current thrust apparently seems as if, for many people, especially because how we have been seeing it perpetuated in the media, that it's, when a ganja story come up, we see it in the media, a man billing a spliff or a man blowing a chalice. This is itself, to me, and others tends to mislead people that ganja is for that purpose, and we know that there are over 3,000 uses and purposes. How can we move away basically from that, and what will your ministry intend to do to ensure people does not get the wrong message?
Well, the first thing we've done is we've produced that fact sheet, which is an attempt to explain what the law means in clear language and in a structure which is logical. And I think that's a helpful document, and I encourage people to look at it. It's on the ministry's website, moj.gov.jm. We're also collaborating with the Ministry of Health and the National Council on Drug Abuse to develop a public education program, which is really going to be focusing on trying to discourage the consumption of ganja through smoking by vulnerable populations. And by vulnerable populations, primarily we're referring to kids and kids who are in school, but also pregnant women and persons who have some form of mental disorder that is exacerbated by ganja use. Mm-hmm. So that public education program is nearly complete. The final touches are being put on it now, and then we're going to be taking it to Cabinet to get it funded.
Okay.
And it will be rolled out. Mm-hmm. So that is really an important element in this, because we really do not want to... So, there's a perception of this as being, it's a free-for-all situation, mm-hmm. and that's not the intent. The intent is not to encourage anybody to go out and start smoking ganja who wasn't doing so before, or even if they were doing so before. If they're from a vulnerable population, they really shouldn't be doing it. Right. So, and there's been no messaging around that issue. If you notice, Jamaica has had zero effort in terms of public education around the dangers of ganja use by persons who shouldn't be using it. Mm-hmm. And even the Rastafarian community, I shouldn't say even, but the Rastafarian community itself, who have a particular regard for ganja from a sacramental point of view, also acknowledge the need for responsible approaches to the use of ganja.
All right.
So
on Facebook, Dorrit Abrams says, my question is, what is the situation with ganja seeds? Is it legal to have the seeds in your possession, as some persons use it as part of their health food regimen? She says, I've seen the seed powder in health food stores.
Yes, under the international conventions, seeds are not illegal. And I don't think seeds should be regarded as an illegal substance, because they're not so treated under the international regime.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I know I'm going swiftly because there are many questions and I know you don't have much time. All right. Rena Robinson on Facebook says, what if the police hold someone with less than 2 ounces and that person is not in possession of an ID card? He's saying, how are they going to know your real name when the person decides to give the wrong name? Are they going to take you in until you can present an ID card so they can issue their ticket?
They ought not to arrest you because they don't have the power of arrest in relation to small quantities. In terms of the procedure that they will follow in those, if the person is unable to substantiate their identity, that is something I think that they would have to work out. But at the end of the day, it's not an arrestable offense. So the question of using reasonable force to force somebody to come into custody so that their ID could be produced would not be appropriate.
All right. And Caleb Ben Haile Selassie on Facebook says, question, Honorable Minister Mark Goldyn, will the monies from those who pay fines for ganja possession, 2 ounces or less, go towards ganja education in Jamaica?
The proceeds of the licensing regime and permitting regime that this legislation allows, it will be going towards funding education programs in relation to ganja use, also mental health services and ganja research, medicinal ganja research. The fines, which will be a very small amount, will be treated in the same way that any other fines are, which is that they go into the consolidated fund of the government. But the more important revenue sources from this are the licensing fees that will be payable by persons who are going to get into the medical ganja industry, and the permits fees that may be charged, for example, for visitors who are medicinal marijuana patients in Canada, the United States, Europe, etc. And if they come to Jamaica and they want to be able to continue their treatment, they can purchase a permit here, and that will be a source of revenue that will be available towards the programs that I described earlier, which are ganja-related. One other aspect of it is the funding will be strengthening the National Council on Drug Abuse and the rehab programs that they offer.
All right. Someone is asking, since the legalization of marijuana, well, I think they mean the decriminalization of marijuana, is for medical purposes, do we have the facilities to capitalize on that?
The medical facilities, sorry, I was distracted.
On the text line, there is a question that since the... And I'm just reading it as they said it. Since the legalization of marijuana is for medical purposes, do we have the facilities to capitalize on that?
Good question. Presently, no. It is going to involve investment in this new industry, but there's significant interest, I can tell you, in this new industry, both locally and from abroad. Very significant interest. It is a growing industry internationally. The use of the plant for medicinal purposes has been given prominence by CNN, Sanjay Gupta's documentaries and others, and the potential benefits of the plant from the point of view of medicine and therapy is an expanding science. Jamaica is well positioned, we believe, to be a player in that industry from the point of view of the association in the minds of people around the world of ganja, of Jamaica with ganja, rightly or wrongly. That is just a reality. And that gives us a certain brand strength in this area. I'm very pleased that the University of the West Indies and UTech have a very strong interest in going into ganja research and have been given permits to do so, not just the ad hoc arrangements that existed in the past where they could get compressed ganja or ganja seized by the police to do some research on, but the ability to now cultivate under controlled conditions and do proper research. So there's going to be an investment in research and development. There's going to be have to be private investment in the various steps along the supply chain, from cultivation through to processing, through and testing, through to development of products. And there's a whole range of products that can be produced from ganja and its derivatives, through to dispensaries and retail. So the answer is there is going to need to be significant additional investment, and that investment is largely going to come from private sources.
Minister, I'm going to take one final question and invite you, reissue the invitation for you to join us in the studio on a Sunday morning between 7 and 9 a.m. to take these calls. There are many. All right. Mackie Conscious, thanks.
I don't mind taking the calls, it's 7 to 9 a.m. past.
I know.
On a Sunday. Yes.
All right. Just coming to Ocho for the weekend. All right. Can you find out from the Minister if anything will be put in place to prevent the multilateral companies taking over the ganja industry from the small man who suffered fighting for its legalization? Will the government provide funding farming loan for small farmers? That's from Mackie Conscious. Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you, Mackie Conscious. Yeah, President Obama actually raised that specter, didn't he, in his town hall meeting with the young people, the idea that, that's a risk that Jamaica faces. We are very conscious of the need to ensure that those who have been involved in the industry for many, many years, albeit in the shadows and unlawfully, if they want to come into the light and be part of a lawful industry, they must be afforded the opportunity to do that. And we will not be countenancing any industrial arrangements that would mean that multinational companies come and take over the industry and exclude our local farmers and so on. So that's the short answer. How we do that in practice needs to be worked through. Different ideas are being considered. Having, for example, a limit on the acreage of any individual farm is one possible way of dealing with that. Requiring any foreign investor to have local partnerships, having at least a certain percentage of the equity in the business is another, and so on. So there are ways that this can be done, and at the end of the day, we will be working with the Cannabis Licensing Authority that has been established to develop the regulatory regime and then to monitor and implement it. We'll be working with them to come up with a system that ensures that small growers are allowed to participate. One possibility, for example, would be to require any major processing facility to have arrangements with small farmers before they can even get a license to invest in the industry. There's affirmative action, in other words, is possible through clear policy decision making, and it is certainly my intention that that should be the case. On the question of providing finance, the lending facilities that exist in the agricultural sector already through the PC banks and so on, those should become available to persons who wish to engage in ganja production pursuant to a license under the lawful system that is being developed for medical marijuana. So that should be an available source. But also, I think that there will be a significant need for where private capital comes into this industry and wants to, or is encouraged to enter into arrangements with farmers to cultivate for them and so on. Technology transfer and financial inputs will be hopefully part of that package. And there are models for that type of approach to agriculture in Jamaica already, where you have a sort of nurturing concept between the provider of the capital and the technology and the actual farmers who produce the product on their behalf. So that type of model is something that I think could work well in this area too.
All right. Well, the one thing you said there that really jumped out of me is the whole idea of affirmative action in this, and we will pick up on that when we talk again. And Minister, please consider coming down to Otrias, and we'll have this conversation. We have so much to talk about.
Yes. Well, as we started in this conversation today, it's an interesting area, an area that's generating a lot of interest. It's an area with, I think, significant economic potential for Jamaica. I don't want to overblow that because I'm not really, I'm not promising anything, but just my interaction with people from here and abroad over the last year or more indicates to me that this is something that could be of great benefit for the country if we roll it out correctly. And there are going to be gray areas and so on, and it's going to require time to identify where those areas are and whether it can be addressed administratively or some other solution is required. But we're committed to trying to make this thing work well for the country, and I certainly regard that as an important role I have to try and play. And I will be, part of that role is public education. So I will make myself available.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.